The cliff was collapsing. Time was running out. And then she saw them, the unborn lives hidden beneath the dog's ribs. Her arms shook, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment pressing against her bones. 1,000 feet below, the turquoise river carved through the canyon like a blade of light, beautiful and deadly. Dust swirled in the air as crumbling earth gave way beneath her knees. She leaned forward, gripping the edge with bloodied hands as the German shepherd's body dangled helplessly below, suspended by nothing but trust. The dog was silent. Her eyes locked on the woman's face, breathing shallow and fast. Her back legs hung limp, paws scraping uselessly against the canyon wall. And then the woman's eyes fell to her belly, swollen, stretched, visibly moving. Not from breathing. From within. She was not just dying. She was carrying life. The woman choked back a sob and shifted her weight lower, ignoring the rocks cutting into her skin, ignoring the warning groan of the earth below. She reached farther, just enough to wrap trembling fingers around the shepherd's front leg. The dog did not resist. She simply pressed into the contact, desperate but calm, as if she had been waiting for this one moment all along. The woman gritted her teeth, pulled, and screamed through clenched breath as her muscles screamed back. Inch by inch, she dragged the dog upward until, at last, the shepherd's body cleared the edge and collapsed onto solid ground. But as soon as the danger passed, a deeper silence took hold. Not relief. Stillness. The woman looked closer, running her hand gently along the dog's side. No collar. No scars. No ID. Just a small metallic glint under her fur. She leaned in and brushed it clear, a microchip. But not a pet chip. It was industrial. Government grade. A series of coded numbers. And etched beside it, barely visible unless the fur was parted, were 3 words. Subject terminated. Failed. She had not fallen. She had been discarded. Elena had never taken that trail before. It was too far from town, too steep, too forgotten, a crumbling edge of wilderness that rarely saw more than the wind and the echo of its own silence. But that morning, something in her heart had pulled her off course. She was not the kind of woman who believed in signs. Yet as she drove past the faded marker, her hands turned the wheel without hesitation. Perhaps it was fate. Perhaps it was instinct. But something had led her there. Elena was a field medic, recently returned from her 3rd tour overseas. She had seen her share of broken bodies and broken systems, but nothing had ever left her as hollow as what came after. War had taught her how to patch wounds. Civilian life had shown her how to carry them. Since returning, she had spent her days hiking alone, listening to the quiet that no longer made her flinch. The mountains had become her place of healing. Until they became something else entirely. She had parked at the base of the canyon and started climbing just after dawn. The wind was stronger than usual, the trees creaking with warnings. And as she neared the ridge, she heard it, a sound that did not belong. Not a bark. Not a cry. A breath. A pause. The sound of something not just alive, but barely holding on. When she reached the cliff, she saw her, a German shepherd, dangling by one paw from a fractured ledge, her body twisted with exhaustion, her eyes locked not on the ground below but on the sky above. And there, rising and falling beneath torn fur and layers of dust, was a swollen belly. Unmistakably full term. Elena's mind screamed at her to move. Her training took over. She dropped to her knees, anchored herself into the ground, and reached. What followed was pure instinct. The dog had not resisted. She had not panicked. She had let herself be pulled back to solid ground with the kind of grace that only comes from knowing the pain of giving up. Elena had expected the animal to collapse, maybe run, or maybe lash out in confusion. But the dog had done none of those things. She had looked at Elena with eyes full of memory. Back at the cabin, Elena worked quickly, warm blankets, clean water, a slow syringe of fluids through the cheek. The dog did not eat, but she stayed close. Silent. Watchful. There was no collar. No tag. But as Elena bathed her in low light and gently examined the skin beneath the matted fur, she saw it, a glint, faint but unmistakable. She parted the fur again and found it, a microchip. Embedded too precisely to be random. Not the standard kind used for domestic pets. This one was cold. Technical. Industrial. She scanned it with an app used for tracking lost animals. Nothing. Unregistered. Then she pulled a magnifier from her kit and looked again. That was when she saw the engraving. 3 words etched in microtext beside the chip. Subject terminated. Failed. She sat back in silence, her pulse hammering. This dog, this mother, had not fallen. She had been dumped. Marked as failed. And left to die with her unborn pups. The chip was not meant to be found by civilians. It was placed by people who had no intention of being traced. Elena began to search the rest of the shepherd's body, gently, carefully. The dog winced at certain spots, particularly near the base of the spine. There, Elena found faint bruising, barely visible through the fur. Needles. Electrodes. Restraint marks. Someone had tested her. Used her. Then decided she was no longer valuable. Elena stepped back, trying to steady her thoughts. This was not a one-off act of cruelty. It was too calculated. Too precise. The shepherd's body told a story without language, one of captivity, failed programming, and a pregnancy that had not been part of the plan. She turned toward the window. Outside, the sun had begun to set, casting warm gold over the snow-dusted trees. The world looked peaceful. But inside the cabin, nothing felt safe anymore. And then came the knock. 3 short taps. Elena froze. No one knew she was here. No one ever came this far without calling. Rue, the name that had just come to her, like something whispered, stood up slowly and moved to the door. Her ears were not back. They were upright. Alert. Not fearful. Focused. Elena moved to the window and peeked through the edge of the curtain. No one stood there. But something was pinned to the door, a folded piece of white cloth, stained with blood, and clipped at the top with a small steel tag. She opened the door slowly and pulled it free. There were no words on the tag. Just a number. 47. And below it, 3 freshly scratched letters. RTB. Return to base. She did not sleep that night. The blood-stained cloth lay folded on the table, untouched but heavy, as if it carried weight beyond its size. The tag, marked 47, rested beside it, cold and metallic, catching the light like a blade. Elena stared at it for hours, unable to look away and unwilling to touch it again. Rue lay near the door, eyes half closed but not asleep. Her ears twitched at every creak, every gust of wind, every shift in the dark that whispered something was not finished. By dawn, the sky had turned the color of wet ash, and frost glazed the windows in delicate veins. Elena rose without speaking and moved into the kitchen. She boiled water, warmed broth, and added a touch of boiled rice and lean chicken. Rue did not come at first. But when the scent carried across the room, she stood, stretched, and walked forward, slow and steady, like she had done it 100 times in another life. Elena placed the bowl on the floor and stepped back. Rue stared at it. Then at her. And then she ate. Not greedily. Not cautiously. Deliberately. Every bite was a decision. A silent acknowledgement that trust had been offered, and she was willing to accept it, piece by piece. They moved through the day in quiet rhythm. Elena cleaned the spare room, laying out thick wool blankets and placing them in the sun to soften. She found an old rug in storage, the one her mother had used in the nursery before her brother was born, and rolled it out near the fireplace. Rue followed her through each motion, watching. Not tail-wagging. Not playful. But present. Connected. Later that afternoon, Elena stood before the dog with something in her hands. A collar. It was simple, soft brown leather with a brass buckle, engraved not with numbers but with a single word, Rue. She had chosen the name in her mind the moment their eyes met. Rue. Short for ruthless hope. A name born of pain and persistence. Of beauty that had endured violence. She knelt slowly and held out the collar. Rue did not flinch. She stepped forward and pressed her head gently against Elena's knee. The woman slipped the collar around her neck without resistance. That was the first touch Rue initiated. And it changed everything. They began walking together, short steps around the cabin's edge, then along the narrow trail that wound between pine trees still dusted with snow. Rue did not pull. She did not fall behind. She stayed close, occasionally pausing to listen to distant sounds that Elena could not hear. Every time they returned, she circled the front yard once, then lay at the foot of the porch. She always positioned herself to face the forest, never the door, as if she expected something to emerge from those trees before it came knocking again. At night, Elena began sleeping on the couch near the fire, blankets wrapped around her shoulders. Rue slept beside her, never touching, but never far. And each night, Elena found herself speaking out loud, not to Rue, but near her. Bits and pieces. Memories from deployment. Thoughts she had never shared with anyone. There were no reactions. No sounds. But the silence no longer felt hollow. Rue was listening. And Elena, somehow, was being heard. Days passed. The dog's belly grew heavier. Her pace slowed. Elena began preparing a birthing space, soft cushions, clean towels, low light. She researched quietly, methodically, using old vet manuals and journals. But she could not stop thinking about that number. 47. It was not a name. It was a target. And the letters below it, RTB, they were not just a command. They were a warning. A trigger. A label pinned to a body someone believed had no right to choose where it belonged. On the 7th morning, Elena awoke to find Rue sitting upright at the window, the collar still fastened, the fire still warm. But Rue was not looking inside the cabin. She was watching the forest again. And this time, her posture was different. Her back was straight. Her body, fully alert. Her eyes locked in one direction for longer than a moment. Her ears had stopped twitching. They had gone still. Not with fear. With certainty. Elena rose quietly and moved toward the glass. In the distance, deep between the shadows of the pine trees, the branches had shifted in a way that did not match the wind. And somewhere beneath the rhythm of the woods, she heard something new, a sound with weight. With pressure. Footsteps. Measured. Human. And drawing closer. Elena stepped away from the window, her breath low and steady, her eyes fixed on the movement deep in the trees. Whoever was out there was not wandering. They were walking with direction. Quiet. Purposeful steps, just audible beyond the thinning snow. Rue had not moved from her position by the glass. Her gaze remained locked forward, muscles tight beneath her fur. She was not barking. She was not growling. But every line of her posture spoke one truth. She remembered this kind of silence. Elena backed into the kitchen, careful not to startle the dog, and retrieved the small pistol she kept in a locked drawer for emergencies. She checked the magazine, loaded it with slow, steady hands, and returned to the front room. Her military training told her one thing. The person out there was not lost. And they were not alone. By the time she turned back to the window, the footsteps had stopped. The woods were still again. But it was the kind of stillness that follows after something chooses to disappear, not the kind that suggests it was never there to begin with. Rue finally turned and walked to the door. She did not whimper. She did not panic. She simply sat down and stared at the handle. Elena knew what that meant. Rue was not afraid of what was coming. She was preparing for it. That night, Elena moved Rue to the back room and covered the windows. She brought in extra blankets and sat near the bed until the dog finally lay down, belly rising and falling in slow, rhythmic breaths. When she was certain Rue was asleep, Elena returned to the table and unwrapped the steel tag once more. 47. The initials still made her chest tighten. She opened her laptop and began searching again, this time deeper. Through encrypted forums. Redacted government contracts. Abandoned animal research archives. It took hours. But she found something. A decommissioned project listed under the title. Resilience Unit 47. A Black Ops K-9 behavioral program, rumored to have existed outside of traditional military jurisdiction. Dogs had been bred and conditioned not for obedience, but for psychological loyalty to singular human handlers. Trained to respond to specific emotional triggers. Operate in high-risk zones. Carry embedded tracking systems that could be remotely activated. When a unit failed to meet compliance levels, they were labeled non-recoverable. Most were terminated. Only one case had ever been flagged as escaped. The dog's ID had been redacted. But the timestamp was 3 years ago. And the location, the final known coordinates, matched the region less than 10 miles from the cliff where Elena had found Rue. She closed the laptop and stared into the fire. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage. Rue had not only been used. She had been disposed of like equipment gone faulty. Like something no longer worth the power to control. And now, whoever had marked her as terminated had realized she was still alive. They had come back to finish what they started. The next morning, Elena reinforced the locks on the cabin. She gathered emergency supplies, prepared the off-grid radio, and scanned the woods with binoculars from the upper deck. She saw no movement. No vehicles. No heat signatures. But the feeling did not leave. That evening, she went to feed Rue, who had been growing quieter with each passing hour. When she approached, she noticed something new, a small tear on Rue's collar. The leather had been cut. Not fully. But enough to notice. She examined it closely. The brass clasp showed faint scratches. Her stomach dropped. It had been tampered with. She scanned Rue's body again, this time with her portable UV light. Near the base of the neck, just below the chip site, she found a small red dot, barely the size of a pin. Fresh. Not healing. A puncture. Someone had made contact, not to take Rue, but to mark her again. Suddenly, Rue lifted her head. Her eyes were wide. Alert. Locked on the back of the cabin. Elena turned, heart thudding. A soft tap echoed from the kitchen. Not at the door. At the window. She moved slowly, cautiously, weapon raised. The window was fogged from the heat inside. She wiped the glass with the edge of her sleeve and looked out. Nothing. Just darkness. She turned back toward the living room, and that was when she saw it. A black drone, no larger than a fist, hovering just outside the opposite window. It moved quickly, silently, scanning the room. Elena lunged forward and yanked the curtain shut. But it was already gone. She rushed outside with a flashlight, sweeping the porch and tree line. There was no sign of the drone. But someone had left something in its place. On the front step was a folded note. No envelope. No seal. Elena picked it up with trembling hands and unfolded it under the porch light. There were no threats. No demands. Only a line of printed text. You are interfering with classified termination protocol. Comply within 48 hours. And beneath it, a signature she did not recognize. But Rue did. She had stepped out behind her. And when her eyes landed on the bottom of the paper, she let out a low, trembling sound. Not anger. Not fear. Recognition. The note sat on the table, unmoving, but its presence filled the entire room. Elena had read it a dozen times, yet the words never softened. You are interfering with classified termination protocol. Comply within 48 hours. The threat was not vague. It was a timeline. A countdown. And she knew, with every part of herself, that the people behind it would not hesitate. They had given Rue a number. They had embedded a chip. Conditioned her mind. And discarded her when she did not fit their design. Now, they wanted to erase the evidence that she had survived. Elena stood at the kitchen sink, staring out into the dense woods. The trees no longer looked peaceful. They looked like they were holding their breath. Rue lay beside the fireplace, silent, but her eyes tracked every movement Elena made. She was not resting. She was waiting. Elena knew what she had to do. She could not run. Running would lead to exposure, and exposure would make Rue a target for something far worse than the people who had marked her. She could not hide, either. They had already found her once. They would find her again. So she chose something else. She chose to fight. Not with bullets. Not with rage. But with truth. That night, Elena opened every channel she had access to. She uploaded photos of Rue's chip. The tag. The puncture wound. She contacted every journalist, every whistleblower thread, every abandoned server filled with buried military data. She began writing her own report, page by page, hour by hour, compiling everything she had learned. She attached the coordinates, time-stamped drone footage, and medical scans. If something happened to her, it would not disappear in silence. She burned copies to encrypted drives, buried one in the floorboards, mailed another to a contact who owed her a life. This was no longer about protection. This was about exposure. Because once Rue's story reached the surface, she would no longer be a target. She would be a headline. By dawn, her hands ached, but she had finished. She printed one final document, a statement of guardianship, and placed it in a folder. She slid it under Rue's blanket. It was symbolic, yes. But it was real. Legally. Officially. And in every other way that mattered, Rue was hers now. Later that day, she sat beside the dog and whispered softly. No one is taking you from me. Not again. Rue lifted her head. Her eyes met Elena's. Something in them had changed. Not just trust. Resolve. Her tail moved, not in excitement, but in response. In understanding. That evening, the storm rolled in. Thick clouds gathered over the ridge, casting long shadows over the trees. The wind howled down from the mountain, and snow began to fall in heavy sheets. Elena boarded the windows, locked the doors, and prepared. Rue stayed close, never leaving her side. She did not cower. She did not shake. She moved through the house with the quiet confidence of something that had learned how to live without fear. Her belly was heavy. Her breathing deeper. But her eyes were bright. As the storm deepened, Elena stood by the front door and watched the trees vanish into the white. They had 40 hours left. Maybe less. She did not know when they would come. Or how. But she knew they would. She looked down. Rue had walked to the door again. But this time, she was not looking out. She was looking up at Elena. As if to say, I am ready. And in that moment, Elena felt something inside her shift. A weight that had always been there, even before Rue, even before the war, something buried so deep it had no name. It lifted. It did not disappear. But it stopped hurting. Elena knelt down and wrapped her arms around Rue, one hand resting on the side of her belly. She felt the faintest kick beneath the surface. Life. Still growing. Still fighting. And in a world that had tried so hard to break both of them, that single heartbeat was louder than any threat. "I am not afraid of them," Elena whispered. And she meant it. Not because she was fearless. But because she was not alone anymore. The snow did not stop for 12 hours. It fell in sheets, blanketing the forest in silence so heavy that it muffled even the wind. Elena moved through the cabin slowly, checking every lock, every window, every corner. Rue stayed close, more alert than usual, her steps cautious, as if she could feel something Elena could not yet see. The storm had brought a stillness that felt wrong. Not peaceful. Paused. Like the world was waiting to exhale. By morning, the clouds had cleared. Pale sunlight stretched across the ridge, glinting off the frozen branches. Elena stepped outside to sweep the porch, her breath fogging the air. That was when she saw the trail. Not boot prints. Tire tracks. Fresh ones. Someone had been there during the storm. She followed the path to the far edge of the property, where the tracks curved into the trees and disappeared beyond a bend in the trail. Whoever had come had not wanted to be seen. But they had not been careful, either. She returned to the house with her heart pounding, only to find Rue standing at the back door, staring at something on the floor. It was a photograph. Someone had slipped it under the door while she had been outside. She picked it up slowly, brushing the snow off the edges. It showed a younger Rue, thinner, ears perked, fur clean, eyes bright. Beside her stood a man. His hand rested on her back. The man wore a black uniform, no name tag, no insignia, but his face was clear. Elena did not recognize him. Rue did. She stared at the photo, unmoving. And then turned away. Not in fear. In refusal. Elena sat down beside her. She held the photo loosely, heart pounding, trying to piece it together. This man was not just a handler. His stance was too close. His body language too possessive. He had not trained Rue. He had owned her. And then he had let her go. Or so she thought. A soft knock shattered the silence. It was not loud. Not aggressive. Just enough to announce presence. The kind of knock used by someone who knew exactly what was on the other side. Elena stood slowly and moved to the door. She looked through the peephole. The man from the photograph was standing on her porch. Unarmed. Uncovered in the cold. He looked older than in the photo, his eyes tired, his face drawn. But there was no hesitation in his posture. He was not there to apologize. Elena did not open the door. She spoke through the frame. "Who are you?" His voice was low. "My name is Colton. I was her original handler." Elena said nothing. "I am not here to hurt her," he said. "I came because I saw the transmission. You made her story public." "That was the point," Elena answered. "So people like you could not come back in the dark." There was a pause. Then he said something that made her chest tighten. "You do not understand. She was never supposed to carry." Elena's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "She was sterilized. All subjects were genetically modified to avoid reproductive trauma. They were not meant to breed." "She is pregnant," Elena said. "Due any day." The man was silent. And then he said something that made her knees weaken. "That means she was never terminated." Chapter 20. Elena opened the door halfway, her hand still on the lock. "What are you talking about?" "I was told she failed. That she was decommissioned, marked non-retrievable and disposed of." "But someone lied," Elena said. Someone let her go. Or someone lost her. She was not supposed to survive. And if she did, and she bred naturally, that changes everything. Why? Because the pups will not carry the same genetic blocks. They will be free. Elena felt her breath catch. Free. It had never been about silencing Rue. It was about preventing something new. Something pure. Something uncontrolled. He looked at her one last time. I should not be here. But I had to see her one last time before they send someone who will not knock first. Elena shut the door without a word. Behind her, Rue had not moved. But her body trembled. Not from fear. From memory. Spring arrived without warning one morning. The snow began to melt in gentle ribbons down the hillside, revealing green shoots beneath the frost. The wind softened. The silence no longer felt like a warning. It felt like breath returning to the world. And inside the cabin, something else had changed. Something unspoken. But permanent. Rue had delivered 4 pups. Each one born strong. Warm. And impossibly alive. Elena had stayed with her through every moment, her hands steady, her voice soft, whispering promises that no one would take them. No one would touch them. Not while she drew breath. Rue had not cried. She had labored in silence, her strength ancient, her eyes never leaving Elena's, until the final one emerged. Now, days later, the cabin was filled with the soft sounds of breathing. Of new life. Of warmth. Rue no longer lingered by the door. She lay curled beside her pups, her eyes soft, her chest rising in steady rhythm. The fear was gone. The scars had not disappeared. But they no longer defined her. She had become something beyond survival. Something whole. Elena moved through the house with a different rhythm now. She still watched the trees. She still checked the locks. But the weight on her shoulders had changed. She was no longer preparing for war. She was protecting something worth dying for. The footage she had shared had gone viral, not as a scandal, but as a miracle. People had seen Rue. They had heard the truth. And while the silence from the ones who had created her remained unbroken, the darkness had shifted. It could no longer hide behind its secrets. That morning, Elena walked out onto the porch and watched the sun rise behind the mountains. The trees stood still in the light, no longer hiding shadows. Behind her, Rue stepped into the doorway. She did not look back at the pups. She did not need to. They were safe now. Elena turned, knelt down, and met Rue's eyes. "Welcome home," she said. And for the first time since she had pulled her from the cliff, Rue wagged her tail. Not out of fear. But because she believed it. Epilogue. This was not just a story. Rue is real. Her pain was real. And so is the silent suffering of countless others, abandoned, discarded, and forgotten. If her journey moved you, do not let it stop here. Share her story. Support your local shelters. Foster. Adopt. Speak for the ones who cannot speak for themselves. Because right now, somewhere cold, somewhere silent, another soul is clinging to life with hope in her eyes and a heartbeat beneath her ribs. Someone else is still waiting. Not for rescue. But for someone who will not leave. And maybe that someone is you.